Hello everyone, this is Christian Melodexton Interactive, and in this video we're going to do a little quick start for getting up and running using Sass. Of course, in my case that really means that I want to install a couple of packages, one called Bourbon, one called Bitters, and we'll see them in the video. One just makes it easier to write, includes mixins and functions, making it easier to write Sass, and the other one gives us some default styling just to start with. And so we'll basically go from the default styling from the browser, which is this, to having some styling automatically applied to our elements. Like I said, this just gives us the base to further customize within our project. Alright, let's go ahead and get started here. So the first thing I want to do is install Ruby onto my machine if I haven't already done it. And if you are using an operating system other than Windows, you probably have Ruby already installed. If, unlike like me, if you're using a Windows machine, we have to install Ruby. So the first thing we do is just Google Ruby, and then the first thing that'll probably pop up will be the ruby-language.org website. Once inside that website, there's this downloads link. If you click on there, there's a Ruby's installer link that will, of course, install Ruby onto your computer. And the reason that I want to do this is that although we could just start writing SCSS ourselves, there are a couple of packages, or in this case gems, that I like to use to make it easier to do. The first one being a gem called Bourbon. And then Bourbon, basically, as the description says, is a library of mixins and functions, and just tries to make things easier to use. And inside of there, this is the GitHub page for Bourbon. There'll be a link in the article for this video, for this page. And of course, inside of there, there's an installations section. And of course, we install this using Ruby, so it's gem install. So if you go to any console window and you type in gem install Bourbon, I've already done it, so it's not going to install again, but at least we'll see that I'm using the Bourbon 5.0 version. The other gem that we want to install, might as well look at it while we're here. Install Bitters, and we'll see that this version is the 1.8 version. So there's Bourbon and Bitters. Bitters is sort of a beginning styling sheet, so it gives us style to start with, and then we can modify it. And we take note, also this is the GitHub page for Bitters, that it says Bitters is made to work alongside a CSS reset or style normalizer, not replace one. We like to use normalize, so we will be using normalize here, normalize.css. But at least those are the things that we're going to include. And just in case you're interested, they have another project. If you end up using, grids a lot, I don't, but they have another project called Neat. So it's a good project too. So if you want to use a grid system, you can give it a look. All right. So now that we've done all that, we can go back and actually start including this in our project. So as always, you can, the type of project that you're using is completely up to you. In this case, just in case you're interested, I'm using an ASP.NET Core 2 project, which again could be just static HTML. It doesn't really matter. But so we have this project here. The root of it is called Web UI, and inside of there I have a source folder. Inside of that source folder, I'm going to add a new folder, and I'm going to call that Sass. And so now that that's created, what I'm going to do is go to the console. And we're going to go to that the folder we just created, and just as the documentation says, now that we have Bourbon installed onto the machine, we need to install it into our project. The way we do that is just Bourbon install once we're in the folder that we want to be. Since we're already here, we're just going to go ahead and say Bitters install. So we go back to our project. Of course, it's very hard to see. It doesn't scale well when you try to increase the font size of the UI for Visual Studio. But inside of that SAS folder now, we have created another folder called Bourbon. So that was, of course, when we installed Bourbon. I'm going to rename that folder to 0-Bourbon. And Bitters installed a folder called Base. And I'm going to rename that to 1-Base. All right. There's one thing to deal with here like I said, we're using Bourbon 5.0. What I'm about to do is apparently going to be rectified in some form or fashion in 5.1. But if we go into the Bourbon installation, so 0-Bourbon, then there's a Bourbon folder. Inside of that, a helpers folder, and then there's a file called TextInPlace List. And in previous versions of Bourbon, this list here had the input on it as well, which apparently they removed to reduce the specificity of this selector, of the selectors in this list. And if you're using just standard HTML, this doesn't raise a problem. But many times I create, sort of custom components, Angular custom component and whatnot, and some time or two, an attribute on it, for example, would be type equals text on my custom component. Of course, there's a text input inside the component, or an input in there that I'm telling it is to be a text input. And if we leave it like this, then the selector for type equals text will, prove true for my custom component, which means it'll apply the styling onto the component as well as the input contained within it. So for now, our solution for this is going to be just to include the input on the front of all of these selectors here. And like I said, in 5.1, there's an indication that there's going to be some fix to this, whether or not they put the input back on there or give us a way to override this list to add our own list. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Of course, the reason that we would not want to be doing what we're doing now is that, in the future when Bourbon gets updated, we may want to update it in our project, and of course then that would wipe out this change that we just made to this file, and so we have to remember to do the change again until, like I said, hopefully it gets sorted out. But we're done there. Now we'll go into the base folder, and I like to include another file inside of here. So what I'm going to do is add a new file. I'm going to call this _ media queries.scss. And as the name implies, it's just a file that's going to contain mixins that I like to use when making media queries. So just mixins to make it easier, or make it easier to understand. I'm not sure why I just copied and pasted that particular one, but they're going to be in the form of something like media GT. This is media greater than or equal, and greater than or equal to this min width that gets passed in just creates the appropriate media query. So if I add in the others here, let me just copy them all since I've copied that one out of the middle for some reason. So we have like media less than or equal, media greater than. These are all implicitly, I'm in my mind thinking they're going to be pixel amounts being passed in. We could adjust this to deal with the fact that we have some other units, but it'll work for now. So we'll just save that. Now also inside the base folder is another file, _base, which is just importing all of the files contained within this folder. So we want to import the file that we just created. So we'll make another one here, import media-queries. So we're done there. And I forgot to mention here, so the base, we will not reinstall Bitters again. It's a one and done thing. So we want to make any changes that we like to within this base folder. So we're done there. Next thing that we're going to do is to create inside of the source folder. We're going to create a new file. That new file is going to be called main.site.scss. So this will contain all of the styling for the entire application, whatever is application wide. I'm also going to install another file here, which is main.site.ts, so a TypeScript file. Close that. The reason I'm doing that is that I'm going to use Webpack to compile all of the CSS files that we have in, or the SCSS that we have included in our project here. And you can check out the quick start for Webpack. I've already run through it and added it to this project, and that includes a reference to a main.site.ts file, and I just don't want to modify the Webpack config that I copied in, so I just have this entry point for TypeScript. So go ahead and check out the Webpack quick start and come back here. And once you've done that, what we can do is to add, so let's go into our main.site.ts file. And maybe before we do that, we'll also want to set, like I said, when we talked about bitters, is it's created to be used with a reset, a CSS reset. So let's go back to the root of our project, and I've already done it, so I don't need to, but what we're going to do is to install the normalized.css bundle from npm, and we'll just let it do its thing. So that will install, and then what we want is to include those files within our, oops, not the TS file, doesn't know what to do with those, in the SCSS file. So again, depending on your folder structure, you need to adjust these relative paths, but from what I have it where this file is located, this will install the normalized.css. We don't necessarily have to include the Bourbon one unless we do other things within this folder or within this file, which uses the mixins or functions from Bourbon. But we do also want to include all of the base. And this will be the only time that we'll include all of base in any file. Otherwise, it will be just including things like the media queries that we just created so that we can use them in other files. All right. So now to test this out, what we'll do is in the root of our web UI project, we'll add new, and I'm just going to create an index.html page and copy and paste it in here. Super simple, basic HTML page. The only thing that we have on here really is a label and an input, just so we can see things changed. And these bundles will be generated shortly. Go ahead and save that. I'm going to start Firefox up here and find that folder that I just so much stuff. So that index page that we just created. Why you look like that? Do I already have the... I do. Tested it out and didn't delete stuff. So let's go ahead and delete the bundles here. Go back, refresh. So this is what it looks like without the bundles being created. And if we've done the Webpack configuration correctly, oops, get off of there. We can come back in here and do npm run build. Give it a second. If we go back into our project, we can see those files are now back that I just deleted. And if we go back to the browser, we can see now that we have the styles being applied to our simple test page. And so now we're ready to go, not only with using Sass within our project, but having also included Bourbon and Bitters to make it easier for us to use and easier for us to get up and running. Thank you for taking the time to watch our video. I know that your time is valuable. If you liked the video, please subscribe to our channel and click the thumbs up button, as well as share the video with your friends. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please leave them in the comments section below. And once again, thank you, and I will talk to you in the next video.